All right, I'm Nita Carroll with Community Law Program, and we are here today for a legal literacy talk with volunteer attorneys Bruce Denson and Daniela Carrion. Bruce Denson graduated from Stetson in 1994 and was a prosecutor here in Pinellas County for 4 years and has been a criminal defense attorney here in the Tampa Bay area for the last 22 years. Danny graduated from the American University Washington College of Law and then was admitted to the Florida Bar in 2016. Danny practices labor and employment law with the Linesch firm here in Palm Harbor. She also heads the pro bono section of the firm, which is devoted to human rights. And both Danny and Bruce have previously volunteered with Community Law Program before through our Lawyers for Young Adult program. So thank you both for being here. Today we're going to be talking about protester rights. We're going to be talking about that in the realm of criminal law and First Amendment, and then also with employees' rights. Bruce, would you like to give us a general, and I want to mention also that Bruce has taken on some cases pro bono for protesters here in the Tampa Bay area, and we really appreciate that, Bruce. Do you want to give us a general overview of protesting and First Amendment rights and how criminal law relates to that?
Yeah, let's do it. That's great. As a criminal defense attorney, the Bill of Rights is something very special and sacred to us. And as an American, I feel that way. The First Amendment in the Bill of Rights is the first for a reason. It's very important that we have not just the freedom of speech, which we often associate the First Amendment with, but the freedom of speech isn't worth anything unless we have the right to assemble, to get together, to talk about ideas and issues, and of course to protest if we think that's the appropriate thing to do, if the government isn't responding to our needs as a citizen. So the First Amendment is the right to speech, the right to assemble, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, all those things together. But of course, what's topical these days is the right to protest. And we've had some of that going on throughout the United States and specifically here in the Tampa Bay area. In St. Pete, I think we've been pretty lucky. Most of the protesters have been peaceful protesters, and that's what we want. That's what you have a right to do, to come together in a peaceful manner to address your grievances to the government. So just to kind of give you a broad overview of your rights, you have the right to protest, you have the right to come together, you have the right to be heard. You have to do that. You have that right on public property, okay? Parks, the traditional forms of public discourse, sidewalks, in the street, but you don't want to be disrupting traffic, okay? You can't do that. Police, as a last resort, can disperse protesters, okay? If it looks like it's about to be a riot or there's some immediate danger to the public, the police can disperse protesters, and if that happens, you do have a duty to leave the area in a timely manner. And that's where we're kind of getting into some issues right now with some of these pending cases with the state attorney's office. But it's important to know that you do have a right to protest. You do have a right to come together in a public place and have your voice heard. You have to do it in a peaceful manner. If for some reason you think your rights are being violated by police or you're being arrested, it's important to remain calm, to listen to the police officers, ask if you're free to leave, okay? If you are, calmly walk away from the area. If you're not, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to say anything further. You're not going to talk yourself out of being arrested. You don't want to make any admissions or say anything further that's going to put you in a bad situation. You don't have to turn over, you don't have to open up your phone and show them what you've been taking pictures of or video of. If you're in a public place, you're allowed to take pictures. You're allowed to shoot video. So the police don't have the right to make you open your phone up and show those things. But just stay calm. Stay collected. If you're free to leave, leave. If you're not, go ahead and submit to the arrest. That's really what I wanted to cover, that you do have a right to protest, but you need to do it peacefully, act lawfully, listen to police, okay? And if there's a problem or a violation, contact an attorney after the fact.
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
Sure.
Danny, would you like to give us a general overview of what you'll be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. And so I'd like to talk about your employment rights within the protest aspect, and it depends on whether you're a private or public employee, and go into what are your absolute rights versus what rights may not apply in an employment context. When we talk about private and public employees, we look at the different laws that are going to apply. And the first thing that I want to kind of second, as to Bruce was saying, is although a person may have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech, that freedom of speech is limited in an employment situation. In a public employee context, the speech is more limited, and so there are fewer laws that protect employees in regards to what they can and cannot say within that context. Within the private sector context, we've got a little bit more leeway in regards to what speech may be protected. And so employees' speech when they're advocating for an unfair labor practice. So for example, if your employer is paying you below minimum wage, if your employer is not, does not have safe and safety, or does not have any safety protocols, or puts your life at risk, if your employer is discriminating against you or one of your other coworkers, okay, any speech in regards to a protected trait could be considered an unfair labor practice protected speech, and that's protected by the National Labor Relations Board. And any employee in the private sector that makes a complaint, whether it be in writing, whether it be in the form of a vocal protest, or whether it be actually protesting for any kind of action that could be protected as an unfair labor practice, then they have a right to do so, but also they cannot be retaliated against or terminated. And so when it comes to protesting, especially right now when we talk in the context of the Black Lives Matter aspect, does that extend to protesting for and advocating for anti-discriminatory laws against Black and African Americans or minorities? And the answer to that question is it depends. It depends on whether your employer is discriminating against you or other employees based on that fact. Just because you're going out and you're protesting for something that others are doing that could rise to be unlawful, could also be discriminatory, doesn't necessarily give you the protection in an employment world. What it does is, if you do believe that employees within your employment context are being discriminated against, and you go out and you protest, that could be an unfair labor practice, and it could be covered under the National Labor Relations Act. And you may have a claim of action if your employer retaliates against you and either terminates you, demotes you, cuts your hours, cuts your pay, or takes any kind of adverse action against you for protesting for something you believe to rise to the level of unlawful. Now, I do want to touch on the fact that a lot of people have been asking lately whether, when they're at work, can they wear Black Lives Matters t-shirts? Can they talk about it in social media? And can an employer terminate you for it? And again, the answer to that is it really depends in what context you are either wearing it, in one context you are posting about it. If you're posting about it as I support defunding the police, which I think many of us have probably posted about lately, again, unless you're working for a police force or in a private contracting aspect, you're probably not going to have protections, and your employer can terminate you for talking about things that they just don't like. Again, there's very few employment protections, and those have to fit within the unfair labor practice protections in order for you to not be, in order for you to have a cause of action against retaliation. If you're wearing a t-shirt that says "Stop Discrimination Against Minorities," and you've sent out an email to HR stating that you believe they've been discriminating against you and others, that can actually be seen as concerted activity for the National Labor Relations, and could be protected, and you may have a right of action. So it just really depends in what context a person is talking about the aspect or protesting. Now, that in itself also has its limitations. Somebody goes out and protests as a group because they believe their employer is discriminating against them because they're minorities, or because they're not being paid minimum wage, and they engage in unlawful acts such as rioting, breaking, or hurting somebody. That may not be protected under the National Labor Relations Act. And so whenever we talk about protections, they've been very careful to provide limitations as to what is considered a peaceful protest and to what extent is someone allowed to protest. You're not allowed to burn your employer's business down.
Somebody is wearing a t-shirt or a mask at their employers, and we'll start with a private employer. Let's say they're working at a grocery store or a fast food chain, and they wear a t-shirt or a mask at work that says Black Lives Matter or some other political statement. Can they get fired for that? Is that allowed? What are their protections as employees?
Good question.
Thank you. And so if it's a private employer and you wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, okay, and your employer has not discriminated against any minorities, then they're not protected activity. And so you can be terminated for it. However, if you have particularly been very vocal about your employer's discriminatory actions towards Blacks, and you're wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, and a few days before you wrote an email to Human Resources letting them know that you believe your employer has been discriminating either against you or your other coworkers, then all those facts coupled together could be protected under the National Labor Relations Act.
Okay, great to know. And what would you suggest that somebody do if they are protesting, if they are wearing a mask or a t-shirt, as far as documenting emails or correspondence with their employer?
Yeah, and so I think, was your question, what would one do who believes that their employer may be discriminating against them to document?
Right. What type of documentation as an attorney would you want to see in that context?
Of course. And so the first thing I would ask the employee who's either being discriminated against or who's seen the discrimination occur is to keep a log of their own that basically talks about everything that they believe that could rise to be unlawful. Any conversations, any comments, any direct evidence, such as emails or comments, are really key. And then use that log to really either reach out to an attorney and discuss the facts to see whether it rises to discriminatory action, or potentially at that point, what they want to do is if they believe the discrimination is occurring and they've got some information about what is happening at their employment, my recommendation is that they put it in writing and they send it to either management or human resources with specific details in regards to the date, time, who did the discrimination, and anything that may have been said. Because what happens when you put that writing together in regards to you believe that an employer is discriminating against you and or other employees is you give yourself a legal umbrella protection against retaliation. And so for the umbrella to come and be afforded to you, you have to provide some kind of, you have to provide your employer notice that you believe that they have been discriminated against. And so once you put that writing together, you are giving yourself protection against any retaliation for advocating for other employees and for something that you believe may be unlawful. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much.
Miss Daniela, I have a question. So my question would be, so if your employer, guess it would be private, states that, you know, they're not saying that they don't want you to protest, but they're saying that you should not protest with their logo on the shirt, or you should not protest in their name or anything like that. But then they find out that you protest. But even without, you know, with following all the rules they said, do they still have grounds to terminate you, even if it's not on you know, on site? I guess I does that sound like a
Right. So is your question, Sade, then for Danny, is if your private employer gives you kind of guidelines under which they're saying you can protest and you don't follow those guidelines, can they terminate you or discipline you in some way? Is that the question?
well, or can they even tell you not to protest?
Yeah.
That's the big thing, because that wouldn't that be violating the first amendment that he mentioned?
Right.
Right?
So Danny, Sade's question is,
So in a private employer situation, your First Amendment is not protected. So you don't have freedom of speech like you would out in the public to not be arrested, right? There is a limitation. If you say something and your employer does not like it, they can terminate you for it. If you say something that may be protected under the law, such as advocating for something that they're doing wrong, then that may be protected under certain laws. But an employer can tell you not to wear a company t-shirt while protesting. And if you wear a company t-shirt and the employer sees that you're wearing a company t-shirt, they can terminate you for it. Now, if the reason you're protesting is because you're seeing that your employer is discriminating against others and you're protesting your employer's actions, not just protesting the fact that currently we have federal laws or don't have laws that protect against discrimination, or that more people are being targeted because they're of color. But if you're specifically protesting something that your employer is doing that is unlawful, then wearing that company shirt could be argued that could be protected speech under the National Labor Relations Act. But again, it has to be you are protesting against something your employer is doing that is potentially unlawful. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Bruce or Danny, are there any final words you would like to say or to leave us with today about this very important topic?
I would just say, you know, knowledge is power, and nothing changes if nothing changes. So get yourself educated, you know, get online. The ACLU has some good information, the American Civil Liberties Union. You can read about your rights as a protester, and get out there and make yourself heard. You know, it's something you feel strongly about. You've got a right to address the government, and now's the time.
Thank you, Bruce. I really appreciate you being here and volunteering your time today and taking those cases pro bono. That's
yeah, my pleasure.
Danny, any final words?
Yeah, I just at times like this, we see a lot of people feel empowered to speak out about their personal experiences or things that they've witnessed at their employer world that I think they're more comfortable talking about. And I would just, like Bruce said, I would encourage people to talk about it a lot more, reach out to an attorney, even if you're not sure if it's a discriminatory action. Because a lot of times, you know, little demeaning ways to treat employees do rise to discrimination, and it could be because of the color of your skin. And without litigating these cases, we're not able to create new law. So I just really encourage people to just reach out, ask us questions, and, you know, empowered with knowledge so that you know how to advocate for yourself and other employees as well.
Thank you, Danny. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate all the work that you've done and the times that you have stepped up to with our Lawyers for Young Adults project. It sounds like in both areas, right, in the employment law area and in the criminal law area, that it's detailed, it's in the details, and it's subjective to some degree also. So documentation of these things is important. Speaking with an attorney about your specific situation is always going to be the best way to go if you can. And we happen to know pro bono attorneys that help with this. So if one of the youth at Ready for Life is experiencing either of these issues or wants to know more, let me know. Again, Nita Carroll. And my cell phone is 727-301-9711. I can talk with you and then get you in the right direction.